I work as an immigration inspector in an Asian country. Not a cop, but we do a lot of similar work. I work at one of the largest airports in my country. This one day, I was working in line for residents of my country. Think citizens, foreign citizens with legal resident status, things like that. When I see this incredibly thin man in his 30s come through, my first impression is he's super unkempt, dressed in tattered clothes, seemingly hyperactive, a bit paranoid, and talking 1,000,000 miles a minute, all while giggling at himself. Super in-your-face friendly as well. This by itself is not only suspicious, but a bit creepy to see in person. To add to it, his travel companion is a non-native 14-year-old female, who's the apparent opposite of him in every single way. Well-dressed, silent, stiff and still, extremely tense, and showing no visible emotion. Combined with him, that was sketchy enough. So in accordance with our human trafficking recognition and reaction guidelines, we moved to separate them. Since I was the primary inspector, that was my job. I determined that the best course of action is sending them to our investigatory area's waiting room, getting police present to help separate the girl to bring her to our safety room, and then getting the man into an interview room himself. The initial part of the plan went perfectly, but when I went to lead the man to our interview area, his demeanor drastically changed. He went from a ball of excited, hyperactive anxiety to a much more calm, yet standoffish state. Originally, he was making large dramatic hand movements, speaking loudly, but now, he was just quickly glaring at me while muttering to himself. We get him seated and situated. I describe the situation to my supervisor, and I come back into the room with my partner to start the interview with him. I introduce myself, my partner, and we start asking the typical immigration questions. Why are you here? Where are you going? What do you plan to do while you're here? How long will you be staying? He had vague answers at every turn. He said that he was here for business, that he was going to a nearby city, yet couldn't name where. He had a business conference there, but couldn't explain his profession. And he had only booked a one-way ticket. He also stated, unprompted, that the girl that was traveling with him was his daughter. We went over to the safety room that the girl was being interviewed in. She stated to the interviewer through a translator that the guy she was with was actually her boyfriend. She also stated that he promised her money, travel, gifts, in exchange for sex. He was detained by our on-site police and placed in our holding cells pending an investigation. While we were searching his possessions, we were notified that he offered the equivalent of $500,000 in cash as a bribe to an officer to release him. During our investigation, we found $850,000 in US currency, undeclared, in a secret compartment in his luggage. A judge approved a seizure of his electronics, and the National Police Electronics Crime Lab found 18 gigabytes of photographic and videographic porn, consisting solely of children, including the girl that we had in custody. This all happened several months ago, and as of a few days ago, the man was charged with indefinite confinement to a prison or rehabilitation facility with the possibility of release. This charge was brought down from no possibility of release after he's cooperated with police and led to 3 more arrests with information. It's likely that his info will lead to more. The girl was held in a hospital for medical evaluation for a day, interviewed by forensic psychologists and national police officials another day, before being repatriated on day 3 to her home country of Greece. While I have plenty of stories about intercepting people with questionable motives trying to enter the country, this is the story that stands out fully in my mind. To keep a truly devious person from walking around freely and doing only God knows what to a child really grounds me with the feeling that I'm in the right line of work. I have to lead my story off with this. As unbelievable as it may sound, I promise that I'm not trolling, and every word that I'm about to share is the God's honest truth. I cannot specifically remember exactly what grade I was in, but I do remember that it was in middle school. I remember this detail because when this event took place, I was with someone that was only my friend during my middle school years. After that, my friend moved away and we lost touch. This story takes place on the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri, during the 80s. For reference, we'll call the friend that I was with Amy. It had been a fun day with Amy. My mom had dropped us off at the mall where we had been wandering around window shopping and trying on clothes. This was a very tiny mall in a small town on the outskirts of St. Louis. Because this mall was so tiny, it didn't have a lot of restaurants or even a food court attached. However, there was a McDonald's across the way. To get there faster, you could cut through a field that was in between the mall parking lot and a street. Once you cut across that field and crossed the road, McDonald's was right there. So Amy and I went to McDonald's, ordered our food, and sat down. We were eating our ice cream cones and chatting away when a man walked in and sat down at the table in front of ours. The way we were sitting put Amy's back to him, but left me facing exactly his direction. Almost immediately, I began to get an uneasy feeling because not only did this man not order anything to eat, he just sat there the entire time, staring at me with the angriest expression possible on his face. He wasn't even trying to hide the fact that he was staring. I can also vividly recall his piercing bright blue eyes. Now, keep in mind that this was before cell phones, so calling my mom wasn't an option. And being as young as I was, it never occurred to me in my childlike mind I should get the attention of an adult that worked there, or asked to use their phone. All I could remember thinking was this scary man was making me seriously uncomfortable. Amy and I finished our food and ice cream, and I had used her head to obstruct the man's view of my face before whispering to her what had been going on. I told her if he followed us out, that we needed to run. Sure enough, as soon as we got up to leave, so did he. We rushed out the door as fast as we could. Then we began to sprint. I looked behind me, and he was getting into one of those boat-sized cars they made in the 70s, maybe early 80s. Luckily for us, there wasn't much traffic, and we were able to cross the street before he had fully turned his car around to pursue us. When we got to the field, I turned around to look once more to see where he was. And before I go further, let me note that next to the field was a street that ran horizontally. This is the road that we crossed. And then to the left of the field was another street that ran vertically. That street intersected with the one we had to cross, so the field was basically in the corner of these two streets. The street to the left didn't run in a perfectly straight line though. It ran in a diagonal direction that would eventually take you to the mall parking lot. This was good, because when I had turned around again, I could see that he was watching to see where we were going. Next, he turned onto the street to the left of us and accelerated the behemoth of a car. That confirmed to me without a shadow of a doubt that he was making a beeline for us. Like I said, the street that ran diagonally took him in the direction away from us, but would eventually have us end up in the same parking lot. It was very obvious that he was trying to get to the mall parking lot before we could, because the road he was on went away from us, and we were shortcutting it through the field plus running as fast as we could. We were able to make it inside of the mall before he could get us. To this day, I still feel like we got very, very lucky. Once we got inside the mall, we frantically ran up to a security guard and told him what was happening. Shockingly though, he blew off our entire story as an exaggerated tale from two dramatic middle school children. Things were much different back then. I have to think that if today, a pair of young kids approached an adult with a story like that, the police would be called immediately, and a description of the man and his vehicle would be taken. But even worse, when Amy and I told my mother the story, she blew it off as well. My mother was emotionally neglectful and definitely wasn't the best parent growing up. I had to navigate my way through trust issues towards adults growing up because of many situations like this. I never felt protected by the people that should have listened and kept me safe. I felt both alone and unheard. This event being an important reason that I felt that way, but I suppose that's for another story. So fast forward to a few days ago. My husband was watching a YouTube video about serial killers. As I walked by the screen, I stopped dead in my tracks because as he was watching it, a familiar picture popped up in the video. It transported me back to that day in the 80s. The picture that I saw on screen was that man from McDonald's. His name was Tommy Lynn Sells. Let me add that I have an excellent memory and am definitely a visual learner. I may suck at names, but I never forget a face. This man's face falls firmly into that category. This whole experience was such a scary event that I never forgot him or that angry look that radiated off of him. It stayed engraved in my young mind and lingers to this day. My husband already knew my story. When I told him that I thought that was the man who attempted to kidnap me, he himself was a bit skeptical. So together we decided to do a little further research on the guy. What came next only solidified what I had suspected. Tommy Lynn Sells was hard at work murdering people in the 80s. Sometimes his victims were young girls my age, and he was indeed working in the St. Louis area during that time. He was also working at carnivals and was traveling, killing other people in faraway states. Unlike most serial killers, it didn't seem that he had a type. Anyone he could get his hands on was fair game to Tommy. He just liked the rush of killing. What made this even creepier was the mall that Amy and I were at had a carnival going on every summer in the parking lot, on the opposite side from where we were. I cannot remember exactly what month it was when this happened, but I do remember the weather was hot, so I'm fairly certain that it was summertime. I wonder if he was working for that carnival. The picture of him on Wikipedia is exactly what the man at McDonald's looked like, even down to the same evil, angry look. I encourage you to check it out. That's an expression that I will never forget. I've been racking my brain over and over ever since seeing that YouTube video. I don't know if I should attempt to contact the FBI with my story. Though he was executed in 2014, law enforcement knows of 22 murders he committed, although they suspect there are many, many more out there. My story might place him in an area someone disappeared from, but I don't know how helpful it would be considering I can't remember the exact month or year. Thanks to my previous conditioning, I don't even know if I would be believed. It definitely leaves me wondering what I should do in this situation. This story occurred to me when I was right at the edge of adulthood. I believe that I was 17, and now that I've had more than a decade to reflect upon this, I've begun to grasp just how messed up it truly is. A little background to set the stage. Both of my parents are tattooed, my stepdad being very heavily tattooed, so I basically grew up in our local tattoo shop. My family was great friends with everyone involved, and when I needed to make some extra money before college, I went to go work as a receptionist there. The job itself was relatively easy. Cleaning, sanitizing, booking appointments. I'd never worked this scene again though, for a number of reasons. At the time, there were 3 tattoo artists in the studio, 2 male and 1 female. The 2 more respected of the artists would commonly only stay for appointments, and then would leave me alone with the 3rd guy, Paul, to do walk-ins. Paul was a big man, about 6 feet 3 inches tall, husky. Definitely not someone you'd really want to piss off. So naturally, we had a lot of alone time together, We were cordial, friendly, sometimes even picking up food or coffee for each other. Most days, I would be closing the shop at the end of the night alone with Paul. We would usually just sit around and talk about life. Except I'd come to learn that Paul was hiding a very big life event. Months at this job go by, with my regular routine with Paul. Except for one day. Paul is nowhere to be found. He didn't phone the shop to let me know that he needed a sick day, so it left me wondering where he was. I didn't have to wonder long, though. The owner called and asked me to go ahead and cancel all of Paul's appointments. I was immediately confused and asked if everything was okay. What they told me after, I couldn't quite believe. Years ago, before the turn of the millennium, Paul had taken the life of his own child, and someone from the public was going to put the shop on blast for employing a child murderer. As history tells it, Paul had been left to take care of his 2-year-old son, Timothy, in 1996. Timothy's mother needed help with childcare and implored Paul to take on the responsibility. Unfortunately, within 2 weeks, little Timothy had been murdered. Timothy died from repeated blunt force trauma to the head. He was found covered in bruises old and new, sizable welts, and obvious trauma to his back, chest, throat, and genitals. Police located bloodstains on the walls, carpets, floors, and mattress of Paul's apartment. Clumps of hair scattered across the living space, signs that highlighted the abuse that this helpless child was forced to endure. Investigators said that it was the worst case of child abuse that they'd ever seen. Paul was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years. In 2013, when we were working together, I knew that he was on parole and that he was living in a halfway house. I never personally pressed the man about it, however. What business of mine was it to question a grown man? I had figured that the shop owner knew whatever details were necessary, and if he was fine with it, so was I. I had trusted his judgment. They fired Paul because someone threatened to tell the public of his crimes, when he shouldn't have been hired to begin with. There were many times that I had seen Paul tattoo the typical baby footprint on parents who had lost their own children, all the while not knowing who exactly was doing the job. I never saw Paul again. It was insane to me that I was pretty much the same age that Timothy would have been. I often wonder, how much did the shop owner know? And why the hell they brought in someone like that in the first place? I left the shop shortly thereafter, and I believe the female artist left the same time that I did, likely for the same reasons. The fact that ownership allowed us to work side by side with a parent, although I struggle to call him that, who murdered his own child, will forever be something that I just don't understand.